Westuhan min friend and welcome to another video. Today I would like to talk about The Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson and why has it become so successful. Why, as a matter of fact, it was successful from the very beginning. And The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King film itself won 11 Oscars during one evening. And it is all very topical today, even 20-something years later. Or really 20 years later, right? Because the Fellowship of the Ring just celebrated its 20th anniversary, the film. Alright, so 20 years later. Well, of course, we have found ourselves in another situation, as I've said in one of my previous videos, in that the world has been divided into two teams, once again. Fighting teams, teams that are competing between each other. People who are excited about the Rings of Power by Amazon, people who hate it already. And I, of course, belong to the second team. I am absolutely not looking forward to the Rings of Power, although I am going to be making reviews for this channel. Now, why? Let me just repeat, very briefly, things that I've said many times in my previous videos. I'm a Tolkien purist. When I am given the choice now, I always grab the book. I do it even over watching one of the Peter Jackson's movies. Because I'm a man who is not very fond of adaptations in general. I always, and that is of course my own personal view, what other view can I use than my own view, right? So I always grab for the source material. When I know that something was the book first, I would rather read the book first. I don't even watch much anime. Japanese anime, because I prefer to read the manga. For instance, I have never seen Dragon Ball anime because I like the manga, right? It's just so fun to read. On the other hand, for instance, I like Star Wars, and my favorite Star Wars is the movies. The original films, which I grew up watching, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and then Phantom Menace was actually the first film I saw in cinema. So I am a fan of the prequel trilogy, not a fan of the sequels. So I always love the original material. However, I do like certain adaptations. For example, The Godfather. I consider The Godfather to be the most faithful adaptation of a book ever put on screen. And on the second place for me is The Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson. Why? When he made so many changes? Well, let me tell you why. Of course you need to make changes when you are making adaptations, right? It is absolutely necessary. You can't put like 1400 and something pages in, you can't even fit them in those 3 extended editions of The Lord of the Rings made by Peter Jackson. It's just impossible. Absolutely not. But it is important, vital and essential in each and every adaptation to keep the core, to keep the message of the source material in the adaptation, and to stay faithful and truthful to the lore. Tolkien, as I said, once again, he based his Middle-earth on an existing world. He was an avid, well, not a fan, but he was very passionate, of course, and studied it and taught it. He was a linguist, a philologist. He was a master of, learning languages and the historical forms. He was very passionate about old European myths and legends. And he based Middle-earth on medieval and pre-medieval Europe. So even though Middle-earth is a fantasy world, and a lot of people are using this excuse, when they are arguing with me about the Rings of Power, it's fantasy, so anything goes. It's not true. It's something else with Star Wars, for example. Star Wars is a galaxy filled with different creatures. There is no really, one. It's not based on anything historical, on anything existing. The Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth is based on Europe at the time, where there was no native, and I'm repeating this for a millionth time, absolutely no, there was no native agglomeration of African-looking people. If we are only to look at the casting of the Rings of Power, and there are many problems, and then more and more news is rising. Suddenly, we get to know that Amazon hasn't got the rights for the Silmarillion, hasn't got the rights for the Unfinished Tales, and only has the rights for the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, and the appendices to the Lord of the Rings. Which means that they can only really use a couple of pages and hint here and there on things that were mentioned in the appendices that are also included in the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales, and the rest is of course going to be made up by Amazon. It's not keeping the core. It's just taking a couple of things from Tolkien so that I can call it The Lord of the Rings and then make up my own fan fiction. That's very much different from Peter Jackson being absolutely in love with Tolkien, being a lifelong fan. You should all know that. He has always been a lifelong fan of Tolkien. And his wife too, and Philippa Boyens too, who worked on The Lord of the Rings with him. And they created the films, along with Weta Workshop, absolutely passionate company for making both, replicas and the costumes and all the weapons and the armor and the special effects and the CGI and the practical effects. People who devoted their lives to making those films and to stay truthful to Tolkien as much as possible, because you can never be 100% truthful to the source material. But they've been trying, or they tried as much as possible to stay as faithful as much as possible, and they did. So they left out Tom Bombadil, because it wouldn't move the story anyway. It really wouldn't. So they added the scene at Helm's Deep when the elves came to aid the Rohirrim, and wasn't in the book. So what? It fits into the movie. It felt Tolkienish to me. But changing the law completely, in that really not taking the law into consideration at all, but basically making a fan fiction. And come on, you could say, you've already seen one teaser. Haven't you been observing the world for the last 3 years? Haven't you been observing that people at Hollywood are not really about staying true to the source material, or being creative, or creating new stories, original stories, and compelling characters? They are afraid of making new things. I would love to see a newly made, absolutely original, diverse fantasy series. As I said, once again, if the Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power teaser trailer wasn't The Lord of the Rings, but it was called a fantasy story from the world far away, I would be like, well, that's a show I'm going to check out. It looks new, looks original, looks intriguing. But definitely doesn't look like The Lord of the Rings. So that's it. And of course, now, if we had to go very briefly into depth, it had a very good writing. It had excellent actors. All the actors that played in The Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson were magnificent. All of them deserved an Oscar. The action scenes, or the cinematography in general, was tremendous. The camera was perfect. The music, come on, it's Howard Shore. That guy won an Oscar, if I'm not wrong, for all these 3 films, for Fellowship, for Two Towers, and for The Return of the King. If I'm wrong, correct me. But I think he won an Oscar for all 3 of these films. So yeah. My throat's getting dry, sorry. And yes, it did leave out the Scourge of the Shire at the end. But it would be too not happy ending for a film, for a blockbuster film. Believe me, a lot of normies would be very confused to see Saruman, in the Shire, and then being killed by Grima Wormtongue. Yeah, I also don't like a lot of things that Peter Jackson did or left out. But all in all, I have to say that it is a tremendous success. And the visual aspect of The Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson is what most people in the world imagine Middle-earth to be. You can't argue with that, can you? People who've read the books first might have had their own idea, or might have their own vision, but it's a fact that The Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson brought a lot of people into reading Tolkien. And those people who saw the movies first, and then they decided to read Tolkien's books, it is very probable and very likely that they imagine most of the things in the books looking like the designs from the Lord of the Rings films. Designed by John Howe, designed by Alan Lee, designed by Weta Workshop, approved by Peter Jackson. All these creative minds who all loved Tolkien. The entire New Zealand was involved in making the film. So don't try to tell me it wasn't diverse enough. And don't even start telling me that it wasn't diverse because it didn't include POC characters and POC lesbians in wheelchairs and Eskimos with one foot and one hand only. Well, come on. It stuck to the original material. It really did resemble, and I'm a European, you can trust me, it does resemble, even though it was shot in New Zealand, it does resemble Europe. It resembles the meadows of the English countryside. I mean, Hobbiton. The mountains resemble the Alps. Alps are mountains in Europe. Even my own country, the Czech Republic, has such a beautiful nature that I can find in my own country places that look like they came from The Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson. So it really does resemble Europe. Indeed, believe me. And all in all, these are finishing thoughts. It is important. It is very much complex. I know it is a double-edged sword and it is very much subjective. But making changes here and there, leaving out scenes, or adding some, minor details. I'm not talking about the Hobbit trilogy. That's another matter. Didn't like them at all. We're talking about The Lord of the Rings. Leaving out scenes, something different than changing the things completely and lying to fans, brutally lying to fans that, because Amazon has changed their statements a millionth time in the last half a year. Like, we own the Silmarillion. We don't own the Silmarillion. It's going to be in the Second Age. It's going to be in the First Age. There's going to be the Age of the Trees as well. What? But only from the appendices. What? Because we want to connect the stars. What? Because Tolkien should represent today's world and POC characters. What? Come on. You can't compare these two things. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below what your stance is. And if you agree with me or not, if you like Peter Jackson's trilogy or not. I think most of you do. Come on, don't be hypocrites. You love the Lord of the Rings films by Peter Jackson. They're awesome. And that'll be all. Thank you very much for watching. And Namaste.